The conference room hummed with chatter as I checked my phone, its screen illuminating with an incoming call from Tyler. I stepped out into the hallway, expecting the usual pleasantries. "How's the trip?" Or, "When will you be home?" Instead, his voice crackled through the line, cold and almost smug. "I'm divorcing you," he said, his tone triumphant. "I've already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live." His words hit me like a physical blow, the audacity of them stealing my breath away. The complete lack of remorse was almost laughable. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, a fire that burned brighter with every word he said. My hand tightened around the phone, steadying myself as I forced out a response. "You sold the apartment?" I asked, keeping my voice deceptively calm. "Yeah," he replied with a dry, humorless laugh. "Nicole and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than a tiny place like that anyway." Nicole. The name stung, even though I'd suspected for months there was someone else. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the growing distance between us, they all pointed to a third party. But hearing him speak her name so casually, as if I were the intruder in their life, lit a fire of rage deep inside me. "Sounds good," I said, my voice icy. There was no way I was going to give him the satisfaction of hearing me break. "My name is Amelia, and until that moment, I believed I'd married a man I could trust. Tyler and I had been together for 6 years, and while things hadn't always been perfect, I believed in our partnership. We'd worked hard to buy our apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in the city that I had fallen in love with the moment I laid eyes on it. It wasn't just a home to me. It was a symbol of everything we'd built together. Or, at least, that's what I had thought. Looking back, there had been signs. Small cracks in the foundation that I'd ignored. His dismissive attitude whenever I brought up finances. The way he would brush off my concerns with a charming smile and a quick kiss. I'd always assumed his confidence came from knowing what he was doing. Now, I saw it for what it really was. Manipulation. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat through client meetings, nodding at all the right moments, but my mind was racing. Tyler thought he'd won. He thought he could pull the rug out from under me, sell the home I'd worked so hard for, and walk away unscathed. But there was one crucial detail he hadn't accounted for. The apartment deed had been in my name alone for months. I'd had it transferred after we refinanced earlier that year. A move Tyler had agreed to without much thought, since it meant a lower interest rate. He'd never bothered to ask about the details, never bothered to read the paperwork he'd signed. His carelessness was about to be his undoing. By the time I returned to my hotel room that evening, my shock had turned into a cold, focused resolve. I wasn't going to cry or beg. If Tyler wanted a fight, fine. But this was a fight I was going to win. The first call I made was to Chloe, my lawyer and longtime friend. I laid out the entire situation, my voice calm, even though my pulse raced with adrenaline. "He sold the apartment," she repeated, disbelief in her voice. "Does he even realize he can't do that without your consent?" "Apparently not," I replied, a hint of dark amusement creeping into my tone. "He thinks he's already spent the money on his new life with Nicole." Chloe laughed dryly. "Well, he's in for a rude awakening. The sale is invalid. You can prove sole ownership. And if he's taken any money from the buyer, he's looking at fraud charges." The word fraud sent a thrill of satisfaction through me. "What do we need to do?" I asked. "First, we'll notify the buyer that the sale is illegal," she said. "Then we'll draft a formal letter for Tyler, outlining the consequences of his actions. If he's dumb enough to try anything else, we'll take him to court." As I hung up, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Tyler thought he'd outsmarted me, that I'd be scrambling, powerless. But in reality, he had just set himself up for the ultimate humiliation. The rest of the trip passed with me focusing on my work, compartmentalizing my emotions, and channeling all my energy into the task ahead. The betrayal still hurt, but the thought of reclaiming my life, of watching Tyler's smugness crumble, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. When I boarded the plane home, I was ready to face Tyler, ready to dismantle his lies, ready to start a new chapter without him. This wasn't just about winning. It was about taking back control. The flight home gave me hours to reflect on how everything had unraveled. Tyler's arrogance was astounding. He hadn't even tried to hide his betrayal, as though I was nothing more than an obstacle to bulldoze on his path to freedom. But instead of spiraling into anger, I focused on what I would do when I returned. Tyler thought I was powerless, but he didn't realize I'd been playing the long game all along. As the plane touched down, I made my first call. "I'm back," I said, hauling my suitcase off the luggage carousel. "What's the next step?" "We've already notified the buyer," Chloe replied, her tone brisk and efficient. They were shocked, to say the least, and not at all happy with Tyler. They're willing to cooperate, which works in our favor. "And Tyler?" I asked. "I sent the formal letter to his email this morning," Chloe said. "It outlines the illegality of the sale, your sole ownership of the apartment, and the potential consequences of fraud. He hasn't responded yet, but if I had to guess, he's going to be furious." Good, I thought. Let him stew. When I arrived home, the apartment was eerily quiet. Tyler's things were still scattered around. His jackets draped over the chair, his shoes carelessly tossed by the door. But the place felt different, as though the energy had shifted. I was no longer the woman who had been blindsided by his betrayal. I was a woman who was ready to take back everything he had tried to steal. I set my suitcase down. The weight of the confrontation I had pressing heavily on my chest. I knew the storm was coming, and sure enough, Tyler burst through the door later that evening. His face was crimson with rage, his phone clenched tightly in his hand, the letter Chloe had sent him waving like a flag of defeat. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." I took a slow breath, steadying myself before I answered. "No, Tyler, it's not half yours. The deed's been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own." He froze, confusion and fury battling across his face. "What are you talking about?" I retrieved the deed from the file I'd pulled earlier, holding it up between us. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred into my name. You signed the paperwork, remember? Or did you just skim it like you always do?" For a moment, there was silence. Then his expression contorted into a sneer. "You think you're so clever, don't you? This doesn't change anything. I've already made a deal, and you're going to look like a fool when it all falls apart." I locked eyes with him, my voice unwavering. "The sale is void, Tyler. The buyer knows it, and they're prepared to take legal action if you don't return the money." "Oh, and speaking of money, if you've spent any of that deposit, you're in even bigger trouble." A flicker of doubt crossed his face for the first time. His confidence was cracking, but he quickly muttered, "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied, my tone steady. "You've spent years treating me like I wouldn't notice your lies, but guess what, Tyler? I've been paying attention. Now, you're going to face the consequences." Tyler started pacing, his frustration mounting. "This is ridiculous. You can't just kick me out of here." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. "Actually, I can. This apartment is legally mine. You can stay here for now, but that's only because I'm giving you the courtesy of time to figure out your next move. But make no mistake, I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Tyler's anger morphed into desperation. He called me incessantly, leaving voicemails that veered from pleading to threatening. Meanwhile, Chloe worked tirelessly behind the scenes, tying up every loose end. The buyer had rescinded the sale, furious at Tyler for wasting their time and money, and Chloe had already drafted the preliminary divorce papers. "You're in a strong position, Amelia," Chloe told me one afternoon, her voice efficient and calm. "Tyler has no leverage here. Between the voided sale and the fraud charges hanging over him, he'll have no choice but to cooperate if he wants to avoid an even bigger mess. Her words were a comfort, but they also reminded me just how much I'd allowed Tyler to control my life. For too long, I'd ignored his arrogance and dismissiveness, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now, I saw just how much I had given up, and I wasn't going to let him take any more. One evening, Laura came over to help me reorganize the apartment. We packed up Tyler's things, carefully sorting through the chaos he'd left behind. "How's he taking all this?" she asked, holding up one of his favorite ties with a smirk. "Not well," I replied, a laugh escaping despite myself. "He's still convinced he can talk his way out of this. But I'm not budging." "Good," she said, tossing the tie into a box. "He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space or your time." Her support meant more than I could express. For so long, I'd felt isolated in my marriage, carrying the emotional and financial burden while Tyler took all the credit. But now, I had people in my corner, and it made all the difference. The final piece of my plan fell into place the day Tyler showed up at the apartment with Nicole in tow. I was sitting at the dining table, reviewing some paperwork when they walked in as if they owned the place. Nicole's gaze scanned the apartment with a smug, entitled smile, her arm draped through Tyler's. "So, this is where we're staying?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshaken. "No," I said firmly. "This is where Tyler was staying. You, Nicole, won't be staying here at all." Nicole's smile faltered, and she glanced at Tyler, who looked just as stunned. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This," I said, gesturing around me, "is my home. Not yours, not hers, and certainly not a hotel for you two to shack up in after you betrayed me." Nicole's expression turned icy, but she remained silent. Tyler, on the other hand, was seething. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You're being unreasonable." I locked eyes with him, my voice cold but unwavering. "No, Tyler. What's unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, walk away with the money, and expect me to just roll over. You're lucky I haven't filed criminal charges. But I'm done with you." Nicole crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable. "You're being ridiculous, Amelia," she muttered, clutching her purse. "You can't just throw him out." Tyler turned to her, his desperation written all over his face. "Nicole, I can fix this. I just need—" But she cut him off with a sharp, "No, just no." She turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving him standing there, stunned. I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "Looks like you're on your own now," I said, my voice steady. "Let's talk about what happens next." Tyler sank onto the couch, his shoulders slumping in defeat. His hands covered his face, and his voice came out in a muffled plea. "Amelia, please," I screwed up. "I know I did. But you don't have to do this." I grabbed the divorce papers from the counter, sliding them across the coffee table toward him. "I don't have to do this, Tyler. But I am. These are the divorce papers. My lawyer has already drafted them. I suggest you sign them quickly, because the sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on." He stared at the papers, his face pale. "You really hate me that much?" "Hate you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "No, Tyler. I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. You had everything. A woman who loved you, a home we built together. And you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego." I stood tall, my heart pounding with determination, but my voice remained steady. "I want you out of here by the end of the day. Take your things and figure out where you're going to stay. This is the last time I'm giving you any grace." He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders sinking in defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll go." "Good," I said, walking toward the door. "And don't even think about trying anything else. Chloe's already handling everything. The next time you cross a line, I won't hesitate to let the courts handle it." As I opened the door, Tyler stood up slowly, grabbing his coat. He didn't look at me as he walked out, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his failure. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for him, but for the life we could have had if he had been the man I thought he was. But that feeling quickly dissipated, replaced by a deep sense of relief. I closed the door behind him and locked it with the new key I had made. This was my home now, and no one, least of all Tyler, was going to take it from me again. The silence in the apartment was deafening, but it wasn't oppressive. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The space no longer felt heavy with his presence, his entitlement, or his lies. It was just me, the home I had built, and the quiet realization that I had won, not just against him, but against every doubt I'd ever had about standing up for myself. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his things had once been. The oversized gaming chair, the framed jerseys cluttering the walls, the ugly coffee table he'd insisted on keeping. They were all gone. The apartment looked brighter, cleaner, like it was mine again. Later that evening, Lauren came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. "Is he really gone?" she asked, plopping down on the couch with a dramatic sigh. "Gone and not coming back," I replied, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I gave him until the end of the day to pack his things. He didn't argue. Lauren raised her glass. To fresh starts and well-deserved victories. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the weight of the past week lift off my shoulders. It was over, and I had won. I began to slowly reclaim my space, piece by piece. I moved the furniture around, placing it in positions that made me feel comfortable and at ease. I brought out my favorite artwork, carefully curating the apartment so it felt like a true reflection of who I was, not the person Tyler had tried to mold me into. The familiar weight that had once filled the apartment was now gone, and in its place was a lighter, more vibrant energy. Every object, every arrangement, spoke of my newfound independence and the strength I had gained. Chloe called with updates on the legal proceedings. Her voice carried an assuredness that made me feel invincible. "The fraud charges have been dropped," she explained. "The buyer decided not to pursue them, but the divorce paperwork is moving forward. Once Tyler signs, you'll officially be free." The word free echoed in my mind. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about everything I had been carrying for years. The resentment, the constant self-doubt, and the suffocating feeling of being trapped in a marriage that never truly valued me. All of it was finally being lifted, piece by piece. Tyler, however, didn't let go so easily. He reached out a few times, his messages ranging from weak apologies to desperate pleas for reconciliation. "I made a mistake," one message read. "Can we at least talk about this?" Another was full of panic. "You're going to ruin me, Amelia. Is that what you want?" I didn't respond. For once, I refused to waste any more of my precious energy on a man who had proven over and over again that he was incapable of understanding the gravity of his actions. He'd made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. By the end of the week, the apartment had transformed completely. It no longer felt like a place shared with someone whose presence weighed down. It felt like mine, a space I could finally take full ownership of. As I sat on the couch with a warm cup of tea, the city lights twinkling outside, I reflected on everything that had transpired. Tyler's betrayal had been a shock, but in many ways, it had also been a wake-up call. For too long, I had convinced myself I didn't deserve better, that I had to settle for whatever scraps of respect or affection he chose to give me. But now, I knew better. I wasn't just reclaiming an apartment. I was reclaiming my life. A month later, everything had shifted. My life, once tethered to the shadows of a toxic relationship, now stood in the light. The apartment was unrecognizable, not because of any major renovations, but because of the way it felt. It was brighter, freer, more me. The absence of Tyler's clutter, an overwhelming presence, was like a breath of fresh air. The divorce was moving along smoothly, with Chloe at the helm, ensuring that every detail was in order. Tyler signed the papers without much resistance, likely realizing he had no room to argue. There were no dramatic confrontations, no emotional pleas to work things out, just a clean, unceremonious break. It felt both bittersweet and deeply satisfying. One afternoon, as I was going through old papers, I found a photograph of Tyler and me from the early days of our relationship. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, full of hope and promise. I paused, staring at the image for a moment. There had been good times, genuine moments when I believed we were building a future together. But those memories had been overshadowed by years of manipulation, neglect, and betrayal. I tucked the photo into an envelope and placed it in a drawer. It was a part of my past, but it no longer needed to occupy space in my present. Later, Lauren and I celebrated the finalization of the divorce at a chic rooftop bar. "Look at you," she said with a grin, raising her cocktail in a toast. "Single life suits you." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me, one I hadn't felt in years. "It's not the single life," I replied. "It's the freedom." We clinked our glasses together, toasting to fresh starts and newfound strength. As the night went on, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. I had faced one of the hardest moments of my life and emerged from it stronger. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Back at home, I started to think about the future. The apartment had become more than just a refuge from the past. It was a symbol of everything I had reclaimed. But I knew I wouldn't stay there forever. Someday, I would move on, to a place that held no lingering reminders of my life with Tyler. But for now, I was determined to make the most of every moment in the space I had fought so hard to keep. That night, as I curled up on the couch, a sense of peace washed over me. I thought about how Tyler had been so sure of himself during that phone call, convinced that he had won. I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his downfall. My quiet strength had been my salvation. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter. One where I called the shots. One where I chose happiness on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.